The day was calm, like a whispered sigh in the afternoon. Clara sat on a park bench, her gaze lost on the horizon where the sun was hiding behind a row of trees, softening the colors of the world around her. It was an afternoon like so many others, empty of expectation, with a silence that seemed heavier than it should be. The children played somewhere in the distance, their laughter interrupted by echoes of joy that did not touch Clara. She did not hear, or rather, she no longer knew how to hear. She stood there alone, her thoughts trapped in the past. Her fingers, motionless, held a bag that had never been more than an empty object in her hands. Her eyes closed from time to time, as if trying to block out what was left of a world that was fading away. Clara knew that life had been generous to her, but what was left now seemed like a distant echo. The love, the warmth of relationships, the longing. Everything had been taken away, along with the laughter that she could no longer hear. Suddenly something caught her attention. Not a sound, but a presence. A dog. He was standing there, watching Clara with eyes that seemed to see more than usual. He didn't approach her. He just looked at her. There was no rush in his gesture, as if he knew that Clara's answer would come in due time. He walked away gently, walking along the path. But something about him remained, like a feeling, a touch in her heart. Clara didn't know it yet, but this would be the moment that would begin to change everything. Clara didn't know how to explain the feeling of emptiness that filled her. She had never had difficulty interacting with people before her loss. She was always loved and respected, a woman with an apparently balanced life, until the day her daughter Emily, so full of life and dreams, left abruptly. The accident took her in an instant, and with her took the light that Clara had in her heart. Her world was never the same again. Time did not cure her. It only made her learn to live with the pain, to make it a silent companion that followed her every step. The house, once filled with laughter and the noise of toys scattered across the floor, was now cold and deserted. Clara ate her meals in silence, the empty plate in front of her more than a symbol of lack of appetite. It was a reflection of what she felt inside. Even at work, among colleagues, she was a present body, but her soul seemed to float far away, as if observing everything from the outside. The touch of other people's hands, their sincere greetings, no longer touched her. The world seemed like a place she could no longer understand. She tried to move on. She tried to distract herself with books, movies, a visit here and there, but everything seemed tasteless, empty, as if her life were slowly disintegrating into a succession of identical days. The past, the memories of Emily, were so vivid in her mind, but at the same time, distant, as if they belonged to someone else. Clara could no longer access the joy, not even the memories. All that was left was a deep silence that enveloped her, a feeling of living on the edge of something she no longer knew what it was. And it was in this state of mind that she decided to go to the animal shelter. Not because she wanted to, but because of an almost instinctive need to fill an empty space, to do something, anything. She thought that maybe a cat would be enough, a small distraction from the routine. But when she entered the shelter and looked at the cages, her eyes were drawn to something she didn't understand. It was a dog, sitting calmly in a corner, his mixed coat and soft eyes that seemed to understand something that she herself didn't yet know. Clara hesitated for a moment. She had never had a dog before. Animals had always been something distant, perhaps out of fear of losing something again, of becoming attached and seeing the pain of loss repeated. But that dog, with his calm gaze and his silent presence, seemed to be waiting for her. And at that moment, something inside Clara that she had not even known still existed began to stir. Perhaps it was a desire, a curiosity, or a weakness, but she could not pull away. When Clara chose Noah, she did so impulsively, but at the same time, almost as if she was being guided by something beyond her understanding. She looked at that dog and saw something she couldn't identify, but she felt it. His eyes were calm, and his posture, although modest, had something noble about it. He didn't flinch or jump like the other dogs, but his presence was there, quiet and somehow powerful. As Clara crouched down beside the cage, Noah raised his head and looked directly at her, his eyes unhurried, as if he knew that there lay a truth that Clara did not yet understand. Noah was not a purebred dog, nor was he imposing in appearance, but he had a deep calm, as if he had been molded by life itself to be the perfect companion for someone lost. When Clara took him home, a part of her mind still questioned her decision, but another part, the most secret and silent, knew that something big was happening here. Noah, with his cautious steps, explored the house like a visitor respecting unfamiliar territory. Clara, for her part, observed him with a mixture of curiosity and distance. She didn't know how to deal with him. She was still trapped in her own memories and fears. The idea of getting attached to him felt dangerous, as if by doing so she was allowing herself to feel something she no longer knew she deserved. For the first few days, Noah's presence was almost like a quiet relief, like the sound of gentle rain after a storm. He would lie next to her in the living room, or sleep at her feet while she read or watched television. But even though he was there, Clara still didn't allow herself to open her heart. She treated Noah with the distant kindness of someone who didn't want to get involved, as if an invisible barrier still separated her from him. Noah, however, seemed to understand the situation better than Clara. He knew what she needed. No rush, no pressure. He was just there, waiting. With every subtle touch he gave her, like the light brush of his paw against her arm or the soft brush of his head against her legs, Clara felt something new ignite inside her. But she was still afraid to give herself completely. And yet something inside her was beginning to realize that he was offering her more than just companionship. He was offering her the possibility of healing, even if she didn't know how that would be possible. As the days passed, Clara began to notice small gestures in Noah that touched her in unexpected ways. He, in turn, seemed to understand her pain in a way she had never experienced before. There was something in Noah's eyes that conveyed patience, a deep stillness that seemed to say, "I'm here." No rush, no expectations. He approached her gradually, not forcing his presence, but with a quiet insistence that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was ready to feel something again. One morning, as Clara sat at the table, her coffee still warm in front of her, Noah quietly entered the room and lay down beside her, his head resting gently on the couch. Clara felt the warmth of his body against hers, and for a brief moment she felt as if time had stopped. There were no words, no movement, just a moment of shared stillness. Clara looked up at him, her eyes meeting Noah's. It was no longer just a curious look, but a look of silent understanding, as if he were saying without words, "I see you." She felt something small but so significant, a gentle wave of relief. It was as if the weight of her own loneliness was slowly lifting. But despite this, the resistance was still there. Clara didn't know how to deal with this new presence in her life, a presence that was beginning to bring her warmth, but that also made her fear the new bond, the new attachment. And with this fear came doubts, like a shadow cast over the fragile glow of hope. Noah, however, would not give up. At night, when Clara lay in bed, he would come and lie down at her feet, a silent and faithful guardian. Clara, with her heart still heavy, could not push him away. But she also could not allow herself to open up completely. Something inside her was still closed, and every time he looked at her with his deep eyes, she felt a discomfort, a feeling that she was about to lose something precious, something she did not want to risk again. It was a silent conflict, one that grew stronger every day. The fear of loving again, of giving in to the possibility of a new bond that could be severed with the same pain she had known. And yet, with every gentle touch, every tender look from Noah, Clara felt the barrier of her resistance slowly weaken. One afternoon, as Clara sat on the porch reading a book, Noah approached her once more, his steps gentle but determined. He placed his paw in front of her, with a delicacy that seemed to carry the wisdom of all the days he had spent waiting. Clara looked up at him, her eyes filled with the confusion of emotions she did not yet know how to manage. She reached out hesitantly and touched Noah's head. The simple, almost insignificant gesture was like a key, unlocking something inside her. It was as if, in that touch, Clara was allowing the pain to be shared, no longer carried alone. She realized with a deep sigh that she didn't need to carry the weight of the past all the time. Noah was there, not to replace Emily, but to teach her how to live with the pain, to transform the grief into something softer, more manageable. She felt for the first time in years that perhaps there was a way forward, a way where love, though fragile and imperfect, was still possible. Winter arrived without warning, with a cold breeze that enveloped everything in its path. Clara, who had previously faced the cold almost impassively, now felt the season with a strange lightness. The warmth of Noah by her side, the slow walks through the snow-covered streets, everything seemed to have acquired a new color, a new texture. Even so, in her mind, the fear of getting attached to him still persisted. She knew he would not replace Emily, but the idea of allowing herself to feel the joy of a deep love again, that idea terrified her. One afternoon, when the wind was blowing harder, Clara was awakened by an unusual sound. The dog was restless, his eyes fixed on the front door. Noah was staring intently outside, and Clara, not understanding what was disturbing him, followed his gaze. At first, she saw nothing, but soon she sensed something in her intuition, a premonition. She stood up with a sudden chill in her chest and walked to the door. What she found on the other side made her heart stop for a moment. The day was overcast, and the street ahead was empty except for a lone figure who, unbeknownst to her, was connected to her past. Clara recognized the silhouette in the distance, as if she had been transported to a moment she would rather run away from. Emily's mother. They hadn't seen each other since the funeral, but the woman's gaze still carried the weight of a guilt that somehow Clara also shared. The woman stood there, shivering from the cold, not knowing how to approach. She hesitated for a moment, as if she were afraid that Clara would reject her. But Noah, with his usual calm, approached and, with a light push of his paw, touched the woman. Clara watched, unable to react, not knowing what to do with the feelings that arose. The dog once again seemed to act as an invisible link between them. Emily's mother looked at the dog and, with tears in her eyes, said softly, "I miss her so much." Clara stood there, frozen, listening to the words that could be spoken by anyone dealing with loss. But these words spoken by Emily's mother were different. They carried a weight, a burden of grief that Clara didn't know how to carry. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know what. She wanted to hug her, but the space between them seemed too great. Noah then did something unexpected. Without anyone saying anything, he approached the woman and, with a calm movement, rested his head against her legs. The woman, surprised, looked at Clara, who was now close enough to see the subtle gleam in her mother's eyes. A gleam of recognition. Perhaps the pain had been too great to be faced alone, and perhaps Noah's presence, with his silent love, was what was needed to break the barrier between two people who shared the same loss. Clara, overcome by a wave of unexpected emotions, reached out and wordlessly touched Emily's mother's hand. There was no need for explanations, no apologies. Just the touch, the warmth of the moment. And in that touch, something old was released. The pain didn't disappear, but it was shared as if, for the first time in years, Clara understood that grief didn't have to be experienced alone. It was there in that silent and meaningful moment that Clara realized what Noah had done for her. He had taught her to allow herself to feel again, to open her heart to another, even in the most painful situations. She had learned that love is not about forgetting, but about learning to live with loss, to find new paths to healing. Spring arrived slowly, bringing with it a softness that Clara had not felt in a long time. The days began to lengthen, and with them the light of a new beginning. The house, which had previously been shrouded in silent shadow, now seemed to breathe differently. Clara noticed the subtle changes. The scent of flowers beginning to bloom in the garden, the sounds of birds singing at dawn, the warmth spreading through the walls when the sun touched the glass. But more than that, she felt a transformation within herself. Noah was still by her side, her faithful companion, now an integral part of her routine. He was no longer just an animal that filled the void, but a silent friend who, with his constant presence, guided her back to life. Clara didn't know if she would be able to forget the past, or if the pain of losing Emily would ever completely disappear. But she began to understand that it wasn't necessary. As time passed, she realized that true healing didn't come from trying to erase the pain, but from learning to live with it, from finding beauty in the small moments, in the silent touches, in the presences that, without words, offered comfort. The relationship between Clara and Emily's mother also underwent a transformation. In their occasional meetings, they began to share not only their grief, but also their fondest memories of Emily. The bond, previously broken by pain, was now being rebuilt, like a wall that little by little gained new stones, more solid and stronger. It was no longer the words of forgiveness that Clara feared, but the silent acceptance of the pain and the recognition that the loss had been experienced by both of them in different but equally profound ways. Noah, with his calmness, seemed to understand all of this without the need for words. He still continued to make those small gestures that touched Clara's heart in an immeasurable way. He was there every morning waiting for her to get up for breakfast, every night, lying beside her bed with a soft sigh, as if he were a silent angel. He had not healed her in a magical way, but in a practical and profound way. He had taught her that love is not lost, that it is transformed. That mourning is not an end, but a stage on the journey. One late afternoon, Clara and Noah were in the garden, the sun setting on the horizon. Clara crouched down and gently touched Noah's head, her fingers running through his soft fur. He, with his calm and serene expression, looked up at her as if to ask, "Are you okay?" And for the first time, Clara felt that the answer was not just an illusion of healing, but something real. She was okay. And she knew that, despite the pain that still accompanied her, life went on, with its ups and downs, its days filled with memories and new discoveries. She smiled, touched Noah's nose, and said softly, more to herself than to him, "You saved me in a way I never knew I needed." The gentle spring wind caressed her face, and in that instant, Clara knew that her journey was not over yet. There was more life ahead, more moments to share, more love to give and receive. She no longer feared pain, but accepted it as a part of her story, a story that now also included Noah's love, and so Clara's life continued more whole, more fulfilled. Not as she had imagined, but in a way she finally understood. Noah's touch, so simple and quiet, was the key to opening herself up to the world again. And now, with a softer, more open heart, Clara knew that healing was not a straight line, but a winding road, where moments of pain and joy walked together, inseparable. And she was no longer afraid to move forward. The soft sound of Noah's footsteps beside her was all she needed to know she was no longer alone. Love, in its purest, most silent form, was here to stay. If this story touched your heart, just imagine how many more are still to come. Here, every bark carries a new beginning, a second chance, a brand new life. If you believe in the power of dogs to change destinies, like mine, like yours, then subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because together we'll share stories the world needs to hear and feel.